The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
The following program is closed captioned for the thinking impaired.
By tomorrow, I will rule the world!
You think he's gone? He's not gone. That's the whole point. He's never gone.
Is this some radical new therapy?
You see?
Well, I must have not been paying attention when you were just talking to me. Do you think that you could repeat the question? And I listened more attentively. There must have been something in all of that nothing that wasn't quite so easy to see. And I must have missed something when you were just talking to me.
All right, let's see if we've got everything up now.
I must have not been paying attention when you were busy slamming the door. I guess the things that pass for affection ain't the same as they were before. There must have been something in all of that nothing that dropped me like a stone to the floor. And I must have missed something when you were just slamming the door. Oh, I don't mind just a little. It's driving me out of my mind. You spare me the riddle and hand me a bottle.
All right, we'll start right after the Bapa-Bas. I want to hear Jana do the Bapa-Bas.
I don't think I'm going to be doing the Baba Buzz.
That's right, I'll dub it for her.
I heard her a little bit. She
Oh,
tried.
definitely.
All right, I guess we'll start the show. Well, I got to put my sponsors up first. You'd think that would probably be a little important, right? Hi, how you guys doing? My name's Tom Duggan here with the Paying Attention Podcast. Hi, at top. Two Guys Smoke Shop at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. Really appreciate Dave and everybody here at Studio 21. Also want to thank everybody at the United Podcast Network. We did a couple of shows in the last 6 weeks that we thought for sure we were going to be gone. I thought cancel culture had us, especially when we did that Facebook show. I said, oh, there's no way we survived this. And we did.
We did.
They've stuck with us, which is good because when, you know, well, let's just say thank you. That's all. And I won't use it as a way to attack anybody else because that's just the kind of guy that I am. I want to thank McLennan Real Estate, Century 21. Love Matt and Sam and Janet. I love that we have Matt McLennan come on the show once a month now to talk about real estate because people, you know, in the Merrimack Valley, they see what's going on. Everybody's worried about a bubble bursting, the real estate bubble bursting. And so it's good to have him come on and kind of give people an inside look at what's going on in the real estate business. So if they're thinking of selling or buying a house, they can get some pretty good tips out of Matt. So we really appreciate that. Also want to thank Ron Marsan from Marsan and Son Construction. It's really nice out today. This is the kind of day that you want to call Ron Marsan and Son Construction. If you're thinking about having your porch fixed or having an addition put on, he's the guy to call. EIS Investigations. We love those guys. Love those guys because when they give their word, they keep their word. And with me, that's pretty big. We also want to thank Borelli's Deli, which is where I always go after the show to get my meats. I love Borelli's Deli. Angelo over there, we love Angelo at A&M Auto Body over there. If something happens to your car, you bring it to Angelo, no problem. He takes care of you. Who else? Teddy Fairburn, Attorney Ted Fairburn, who does workers' compensation. So if you get hurt at work, if you get hurt somewhere else, and you happen to be working and you think that you have a claim, you should call Teddy Fairburn. HS Investigations as well. And a shout out to Tomo's, one of our favorite places. In fact, one of Jana's favorite places.
Tomo's.
We've been there a number of times together. They always treat us right. And Happy Crab, which is right across the street from Tomo's. Yeah. So the number of sponsors is growing, which is great. We need really like 2 more sponsors if we can get them. And it's pretty cheap. It's like $50 a week. So if like $200 a month, we'll promote the crap out of your show, out of your business.
On the show.
So I have one topic that I really want to talk about real briefly because we've done this a few times on the show. Before we get to Jana, if I can find it because it was here and now it's not. Oh, here it is. So I have one story that I just want to pass along to you. I got this yesterday from the State Ethics Commission. I like to talk about the Ethics Commission a lot in Massachusetts because they are feckless and they are useless. And even having an Ethics Commission at this point, it seems like there's no need to even have it. We've talked about a number of people who were elected officials who abused their authority, abused their position, and they got a slap on the wrist. And everything got every case got closed, and that was the end of it. Well, we've got another one that looks like it's heading in that direction. The State Ethics Commission. Now, I never knew where Akina, Massachusetts, but apparently it's down on Martha's Vineyard. So a selectman in Akina, Massachusetts, violated conflict of interest laws. You're going to love this. He's a master electrician, and in his private capacity, viewed himself as the town's coordinator on a project to bury underground all the overhead utility wires in Akina. In 2018, as a selectman and the Akina Circle project coordinator, Haley allegedly decided he was going to personally install the conduits for 2 utility companies to bury the wires underground. So here's basically what happened is this guy's a selectman and has the town contract with him to do electrical work. He does the work, and then he overbills the town, and here's the best part. He's on the finance committee and signs his own bill and approves his own bill.
Yeah, it sounds right.
So he made he overcharged Akina about $17,445. Here's the best part. He hasn't been convicted yet. He's only been charged. They're going to have a big hearing. They're going to waste a ton of money, a ton of our taxpayers' dollars. And at the end of the day, the most that they can fine him is, ready? $10,000. So if you steal $20,000, you'll get away with 10 of it. If you're an elected official, that's what the Massachusetts Ethics Commission wants you to understand when they do stuff like this. And we've talked about the Ethics Commission a number of times on the show. You know, it's great to have an Ethics Commission if they do something. If they can do something that will prohibit elected officials from abusing their authority. But when you tell an elected official, steal $20,000 and we'll only fine you 10, that means they got away with stealing $10,000. And to me, that means crime pays. And if you're the Ethics Commission, I don't think you should be sending the message that crime pays. Now, is it all their fault? No, part of it is that legislature needs to increase the fines for elected officials who break the law. Unfortunately, the legislature is made up of elected officials. So they're not going to do it because it's going to affect them. So the next time the elections come rolling around for state office, whether it's state rep, state senator, governor, and a candidate knocks on your door or you go to a forum where there's a candidate taking questions, ask them. Ask them if they'd be willing to increase double or triple the fines for elected officials who steal from the taxpayers. And if they say yes, make sure you document it. Make sure when they get in, you call them back and say, are you going to file something to double or triple the fines for the Ethics Commission when elected officials steal money? Because this is now at least the 5th story that I've brought in here where an elected official did something horribly, horribly wrong, and the penalty that they got didn't even come close to what they benefited from when they did something horribly, horribly wrong. So I just wanted to pass that along to you. With me today, one of my favorite people in the world, I have to tell you.
Right back at you.
And part of it is because when she gives her word, she keeps her word, and that's pretty big with me. And I'm just going to leave it there. When you give your word, you keep your word. She gives her word, she keeps her word, and I like that. She's one of the smartest people in local politics in any community. She's a lawyer. She's a real estate agent. She is also probably the most beautiful person in elected office in the Merrimack Valley. I know in politics you're not supposed to talk about women's looks because we're all so hoity-toity. But, you know, the fact is it is what it is, and I don't mind saying it.
Thank you.
We have covered... Oh, well, you're welcome. We have covered extensively what's going on in the schools in general. Mm-hmm. We've had you on a couple of times during COVID to talk about what the schools were doing, and I thought having you back would be a great idea because now the schools are going to be open in the fall, hopefully. Hopefully kids aren't going to be made to wear masks. I'm going to ask you about that. But I think my first question is, how are you guys doing? Like, before we get into anything specific, how are the Methuen schools handling because you're in this big transition right now. We've gone from COVID to kind of not COVID to online learning to half online learning. And now I think we're going into a school year in the fall where everything's going to be open, everything's going to be full, right?
I hope so. So I'd be lying if I didn't say that it's been tough, right? society in general through this whole thing seems to have been divided somewhat in half. So no matter which way you're going, you're always going to get beat up by the other side.
Yeah, you're always going to piss off 50% of the people out there.
Always.
Right?
You know, so at the end of the day, what I try to do is just do what, you know, I feel is the best decision for the district. Whether or not it is...
No, it always is.
Nobody knows. No,
it always is. Your decisions
I
are
know
always
you
good.
disagree with a lot of what I probably did on the board this year.
There
but
are
you
a
have
few.
to, but you
There are a
have
few.
to err on the side of caution. And people don't know. I mean, listen, we're all people, right? On a personal note, I had people originally even reach out to me. You know, we got some nasty emails as a board. We really did. We got some, you know, hate calls and nasty emails. And I have super thick skin, especially being an attorney, right?
Right. You have to, right?
But, you know, you still take those things to heart because I'm also a mom. You know, I also have school-age children. So for me, you know, and I was very personal with a lot of people, you know, they don't know. My middle son had an autoimmune response to strep about 2 years ago that put him in and out of the hospital for a week. So when you look at the statistics with children, although they're very low, preliminarily they were saying that a lot of the kids were getting things that mirrored, it was an autoimmune response that mirrored a disease called Kawasaki, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Very familiar with it.
So immediately I got really nervous for my son who's already exhibited, you know, a form of an autoimmune disease with strep. So for me, I kept my kids remote. Now, I also have to step back and say, well, that doesn't mean that absolutely everyone should be remote everywhere, right? So it's hard to balance those two things because you have the two extremes and then you have the moderate and then, you know, you're kind of teeter-tottering between, you know, what you think is right and trying to please the masses. And it's tough. You know, how are we doing? We're doing the best we can.
I don't know if that's an acceptable answer, though.
But that's all we can do. And this is like new for everybody. This is not like, you know, hey, we can look at, you know, this state or that state and say, well, they handled it this way. Look, that was a great, you know, example of what to do or what not to do. We're all in this together. And I know that sounds so cliche, but it's really been a learning experience. And it's kind of funny because certain things that came out of this, I think will help the schools going forward. For instance, I had been pushing along with Jana Di Natale when she used to sit on the board with me for blizzard bags, right? We live in New England. I actually love an occasional snow day, but when you're getting out at the end of June, like that's not fun for anybody, right? We get like 2 months off and there's like, not this year necessarily because it's gorgeous in May, but normally it doesn't get warm till, you know,
Later.
June or whatever. Yeah, so, you know, you want to get the kids out. You want them to have time to relax, what have you. So DESE...
By the way, can I just stop you?
Sure.
I don't know why you guys call it DESE because it confuses the public. It's the Department of Education.
It is.
And if I could get you guys during the meetings
To say the Department of
say
Education,
Department of
Secretary of
Ed,
Education. Okay.
because a lot of the people who are watching here, including me, like I'm plugged in, right? This is what I do for a living. And the first time I heard, I think it was Mayor Integrity at one of the meetings say DESE, and I went, "What the hell is DESE?" So I texted a friend of mine, "What the hell is DESE?"
Why don't you text me
Well,
and say, hey, for the public?
You were at the
know?
meeting, so I didn't want to bother you. You were in the middle of a meeting.
I know
so,
you could have told me at some meeting, though, and then I could have remedied that a long time
So,
ago.
and he said, "Oh, it's the Department of Education's new name," and I'm like, "Well, but you probably tell people that because we're used to hearing." So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I want people at home to know you meant the Department of Education.
No, it's okay. But for instance, the Department of Education, they said no to blizzard bags. They were like emphatic. They didn't think it counted towards, you know, it wasn't going to happen, right? You couldn't count that towards an actual school learning day. Okay, but now.
Right. Explain what a blizzard bag is.
So a blizzard bag would be, and they use them in other states. I'm not sure if New Hampshire has them or not, but basically you'd get a packet of work from a teacher. So if and when there's inclement weather, specifically, you know, blizzards, but it could be anything. You know, again, we're in New England. So that student would have that access to that packet, and they would have, you know, work to do on that said day. Similarly to how we went about schooling before we were able to enable Chromebooks and Zoom and that sort of stuff, like last March. And those counted as valid learning days with the Department of Education. So I don't see how they can say no to blizzard bags, if not at least access some of our Zoom capabilities now if we have snow days in the future. Having said that, my kids were greatly disappointed that we didn't have any snow days this year. So I think we should maybe still have like One, because I think of the excitement I had as a child.
We used to pray for snow.
Oh, you'd listen on the radio. And my parents were both teachers, right? So we'd wait for their cities to come, and then they'd be going through the M's. And I'm like, come on, Methuen. Methuen. So, there's a lot of excitement there. I hate to take that away, too.
Let me ask you this. Did Methuen follow the science
I knew you were going to say science.
during COVID? Well, because we used to have the mayor here before he became a coward and ran away.
Okay, no comment.
And I used to say to him, because he wouldn't listen to anything. If he had already had his mind made up, Christ could descend here and he wouldn't listen. But I used to say to him, why are you making kids wear masks? We know kids don't spread it. We know kids generally don't get it unless they have like an immune system situation like your son. And the CDC guidelines say kids don't need to wear masks. Kids don't need to social distance. And they were wearing masks, at least for a while. Was the school committee following science, or were they just doing what they were told? Because it seems to me, when I look at the actual science, those who said they were following science weren't following science at all. Like the school committee, the mayor, the school system, they were doing things that weren't science-y.
So I'll start by saying I've never done what I was told. No one's going to tell me to do something. Having said that, I consider myself a fairly intellectual person. And the science, albeit for this particular disease, for me, is not iron proof, right? It's not, everything's so new. So you have to understand, I was talking in the beginning about balance, right? So there's this information coming out from the CDC. And if you remember, I mean, it's so great to look back now over the past year and say, well, now we know this and this. But if you remember in the beginning, first it was like, don't wear masks. Then it was like, wear masks. Then it was, surfaces. I mean, I was leaving stuff out in the garage and everybody was going crazy for antibacterial wipes. And so...
And none of that turned out to be true.
So, yes and no, right? If you read what they're saying, now it may not be a contributory factor to spreading the disease or what have you. So for me as an attorney, when you start using words like may, maybe, might, right? That's kind of
ambiguous.
Yeah. So I love that you say science, but for me, it's still very new. Right? So for me, again, I go back to what I said in the beginning. I had to look at everything as like a total package. And for me, to get the kids back in and to balance how comfortable parents were, how comfortable teachers were, we needed masks on those kids. We needed the spacing. We also had the recommendations from the Department of Education, DEIS. So we had those recommendations in place too that we had to adhere to.
Right. But they weren't following the science either. Like, it was funny because like when we were in the middle of it, nobody kind of really knew what to believe. But we knew common sense, right? We all still had common sense, or at least some of us did. Some of us lost it during COVID, apparently. But we all had common sense. And
did we have common sense? I was pretty scared for a while. So, and I still am to a certain degree. When you read about the Spanish flu and stuff,
right.
I mean, you understand, right? They never had a vaccine for that. So it didn't have a very high mortality rate, especially with kids. Then it came back after they thought it went away. Second round, that's when all the kids were attacked. And it just changed just a little bit, enough to create a mortality rate that was super scary in children, right? That like turned everything crazy. So I don't know. I just don't feel so comfortable with such a new disease, if that makes sense, a new virus.
And I think that makes sense for you because you've got a son who's immune compromised. I'm also, by the way, immune compromised. I've got ankylosing spondylitis.
But even for my other two kids, Tom, I'm just as nervous.
Really? During COVID, you guys did online learning, half online learning. You kind of went back and forth. And I think I asked the mayor one day, and he never answered me, so I'm going to ask you. Did you guys measure the progress of the students during the online learning? And do we have any numbers that show how many kids failed during online learning, how many kids never showed up for online learning? Because now that we're kind of away from it, I'd like to be able to look back and see what happened, how much damage was done to these kids, how much did we mitigate some of those damages by some of the things the school system did? And because I don't want to be completely negative on the schools.
Yeah.
I recognize that we're all people and we all get afraid of things and we all have our own thing. But the one thing schools are supposed to do is measure their progress. And I think when I asked the mayor, his answer was no, they hadn't really at that point measured the progress. I'm wondering now that we're further away if you guys had.
So that's an interesting question. I think in terms of like an actual test being administered to evaluate exactly where our kids are, no. But remember that the Department of Ed is administering MCAS testing, right? So that's not necessarily going to show us what they lost or what they gained this year, but that will show us at least where they are. And I think that's important. And I think more so next year, we're going to see truly, a more accurate assessment of what happened to the kids, because you have to understand, especially with remote. And I'm not, listen, when I speak, this isn't even Methuen specific. I'm just speaking generally. But if you think parents aren't helping their kids, when my kids are in remote schooling, they are all on their own. I can't tell you how many parents I hear in the background, asking questions, doing this, assisting kids. I mean, it's like craziness, not so much now at the end of the school year, but especially in the beginning, right? So now you have maybe these C students. I know we don't use C's, A, B. I'm all for the A, B's, and C's, so forgive me when I use that.
We should have a conversation about that sometime. How we're dumbing these kids down by not giving them actual grades.
Yeah, listen, that's a battle I keep losing. But anyway.
Keep fighting it, though. Keep fighting it, because the parents are on your side on that, trust me.
Yeah, not necessarily.
Really?
Yeah, no.
Really?
But anyway, so if you have a moderate performing student, right? And suddenly they're like top of the class, right? I mean, come on. Now they're going to go back to school next year, and guess what? They're going to be a moderate performing student again. Right. I mean, what's the factor?
Sure.
So I think people, there's some of that. And then there's the kids who might be fantastic learners who are just not as receptive to remote schooling. Right. It's hard. Yep. I mean, you think of an adult attention span. Now think about kindergartners who just came in. This is their first schooling experience ever. My daughter is 5, and she doesn't start until next year. She missed the cutoff. She's a January baby. Thank God. I don't know how I would have felt about her first schooling experience being remote schooling. And it's just, it's a product of the times. It's nothing Methuen could do or couldn't do or. Yeah. So, I don't know.
Where are you guys right now? School's going to start in the fall. I assume kids are done, or kids aren't done yet?
No, they're not done
so
yet.
So is everybody in school right now?
So everybody except for those who opted for remote schooling till the end of the year. And right now, those numbers are pretty small. And thank God that some of the families, by the way, did opt for remote schooling till the end of the year, because we wouldn't be able to accommodate in our schools with the requirements set forth had everybody wanted to go back. I mean, then we would have had a complete remote schooling.
Are the janitors still running around disinfecting everything? Now that we've already found out now that it doesn't get transferred off surfaces, and we know that from the science. Right, I want to keep going back to science.
Well, you say that, but would you argue? I mean, remember, you're talking about kids here, right? They may not be the most diligent in washing their hands. They may not be. So just keep this in mind, because we are still cleaning and deep cleaning. However, if somebody sneezes, let's say, on a desk, and another or in a pencil or something, right? And then another child immediately picks it up and touches their mouth. Science would suggest that droplet, being still wet, could potentially transmit the virus. No?
Not to kids, though. It's like a 0.0001%.
I get it, but you're playing the odds.
And those are my numbers.
I totally get it, but imagine, God forbid, one child in our area, in a neighboring area, got this virus and something perilous occurred.
But that's going to happen. It's a pandemic. You can't. You have to play the odds. When the odds are 99.9999.
And if you talk to another parent, I guarantee they'd feel the way I feel.
My kids are growing up, so I'm going to defer to your expertise. So, what are you guys on the school committee doing now to prepare for the incoming school year?
So, right now, the Department of Ed has already said we are back to school. We are back to school 5 days a week. They have given us no other, this is next fall, they've given us no other indication of what it will look like other than that. So it's hard to prepare other than budgeting for the unforeseen possibilities, right? I'm hoping that, some normalcy is restored, because I feel awful for the kids. I feel awful.
These kids should have been in school straight through. kids that have immune issues could stay home. But overall, these kids didn't need to social distance. They didn't need to miss school. They didn't need to wear masks. They shouldn't be wearing masks. In fact, the science shows that kids wearing masks actually does more to hurt them than help them. And I know, I understand that it's easy to say this now, right? Because we're out of it. But I was saying it like the first day. I mean, I remember Neil came in.
But
like
science
the first
wasn't
week.
saying it the first day, nor was the Department of Education, nor was any. I mean, the potential for harm had we done that out of the gate, I think would have been more catastrophic than just saying, hey, listen, we erred on the side of caution. We were a little too cautious, but guess what? We protected everybody. And that's kind of the way I looked at it, right? It was better to be more cautious and not, because it could have gone the other way, in my mind. It didn't,
Right.
thank God, but it could have. So for me, again, it was better to err on the more cautious side than to throw caution to the wind and potentially have something horrible happen.
We've seen since COVID hit nationwide, and especially in the Merrimack Valley, the numbers are huge on the number of kids under the age of 18, under the age of 17, battling with severe depression, battling with psychological illnesses. Are the schools doing anything coming into the next year to try and deal with some of the psychological issues that kids have had to suffer because of COVID, because of the lockdowns, because of not having school, not socializing with other kids?
So I'm actually really glad you brought that up. Right now, our last meeting, we've had all our budget meetings, right? We're approving it Monday night, hopefully. And one of the biggest pieces in the budget, which I was happy to see, and we've spoke a lot about it, are, the extra guidance counselors and having adequate number of counselors in the schools and adequate funding to have those counselors in the schools, because I think you're absolutely correct. I think that's going to be the biggest battle that we're going to face, right? And then again, as adults, we see what this pandemic has done to us emotionally and mentally. And when you think of a child, you think of high school, you think of elementary, you think of these little 5 and 6-year-olds. When you're that young, imagine the amount of experiences you have aren't as great as we have. So it's
and your coping
more,
mechanisms aren't as good either.
No, it's that much more detrimental to them to have this sort of support that they need. So yes, that in the consensus of the entire board was, everyone was so happy to see, because originally we had the budget layout that we could afford so many in year 1, like a 3-year plan, right? So many in year 2, so many in year 3. And in fact, we were able to get them all in year 1. So that was a big thing that was put into the budget that we were all very happy to see.
Money-wise, since you brought up the budget, how are the Methuen schools financially now that we're like a year out of COVID?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I think Methuen's done a great job in budgeting for something that, again, we just didn't know which way it was going to go, right? We do have, the ESSER grants coming in. I don't think we haven't got ESSER 3. We don't know what that's going to look like yet. But, we're trying to plan accordingly. I made a statement at the last meeting, and I truly meant it from my heart, because this is the first budget process I've had since I've been on the board that it was like stress-free, right? The mayor and the superintendent had worked very, very well together. They came up with a number. Everyone was on the same page. Short of, a few questions, it was like, okay, here we go. We finally were able to get the things that, schools had been requesting or principals have requesting and that sort of thing. So
I will say this, he is a genius when it comes to finances.
Absolutely. And he knows his numbers, but that's so important, Tom.
Yeah.
So it's great to have a mayor sitting on the board that can say, well, and he looks at it from a realistic point of view, right? Like, I can only imagine as a mayor, you're trying to, watch everything. And you have, I know we say schools and city, but come on, it's all the city.
Right, it's all the city.
It is what it is. And he'll actually go so far sometimes to say, well, you know what, we don't have the money. Well, I shouldn't say we don't have the money, but, we weren't budgeting for that. But you know what, you need this. So let's see where we can get it and let's work with this, which I really respect.
Right. A few years ago, when the other Jana and you sat on Jana DiNatale.
Jana, but okay.
It's Jana! When you and Jana DiNatale were on the school committee about maybe 4 years ago, there was an issue about kids from Lawrence coming to the Methuen schools. Now, during COVID, obviously, you weren't able to do much about that.
Not true, though.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
please enlighten us.
So I'm actually the chair of the Residency subcommittee. Jana and I had established it.
Who else is on that committee?
So right now, Jana and I had started it, then it kind of, went by the wayside for the new election, and then Ryan DeZoglio had brought it up again.
He has pleasantly surprised me on that committee, I have to say.
Yeah. I mean, he works really hard.
He does.
So I appreciate that, and we have a great working relationship as well.
Mm-hmm.
So he's on it, myself, Luann Santos, who I can't say enough about.
Literally the nicest person in the world. Like, literally the nicest person you'll ever meet.
But a
in your
great
life.
advocate for the students as well.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone says nice, positive, but you know what? She's fantastic.
I actually want to have her on the show, but I'm afraid to because everything's going to be like rainbows and unicorns because she's so nice, and it's kind of like not what I do. You know what I mean? Like I try
think
to
that would be
chin
a
up
breath of fresh air, though. Come on,
okay.
How
about I have the both of you on at some point?
Done. You should have told me today. I talked to her this morning.
Had I thought of it, I would have.
Yeah, she's fantastic. So she's on the Residency, and then we work with Ed Lucier and some of his staff. So the best thing that happened was when I first got elected, this was like my biggest thing, right? Because just living in Methuen, I could tell you story after story about people just saying, oh, yeah, no problem. My brother lives in Methuen. We'll just go there. And when I asked about residency from the previous administration, the previous superintendent, it was, well, I don't know how you're going to find that information because we have boxes and boxes. So now, luckily, we have been able to put everything online, right? So that in itself, when you think of it, some of the duplicative addresses, that in itself, just putting students, and the further into it we get, with all new registrations, and every year if we do a re-residency, like a recertification of residency, it's being put online.
Right.
So right away you see those things. We have people in the office, with they were able with Mayor Perry to organize with his office to flag with Patriot properties, which is our system. So when something is sold, they can like cross-reference who owns the building, so it's actually much more effective, thank you, than it was obviously previously.
So you guys are making progress in that. Are you finding that there are kids that you now have to kick out and say you don't belong here? I get, and before you answer, I get that there are kids who mom lives in Methuen, dad lives in New Hampshire.
That's going to happen.
And dad's dropping them off with a New Hampshire plate, and people get all worked up and think, oh my God, they shouldn't be here. And I get that happens. But I also know of, at least off the top of my head, 4 people who live in Lawrence who send their kids to Methuen, who don't have a dad that lives in Methuen, who don't have a mom that lives in Methuen, but they live close on the line. They use someone else's address, and they're sending the kids to Methuen. And I don't blame the parents. If I had a choice between sending my kids to the Lawrence school system or the Methuen school system,
but it's not a choice, right?
I would move heaven and earth to get my kid into the Methuen school system.
But it's not a choice, and unfortunately, it's really burdensome on taxpayers, right? So that's what's really important to remember. I've been presented with a couple situations where I found people, and that student might be one of the best kids in the world.
Right.
You talk about ethics. I have to divulge that person does not live in Methuen if I know it. For me, I have to, right? And I think
because you're an attorney or because you're on the school committee?
Because I'm me, Tom.
Oh, okay,
I mean,
all right.
listen, we're taxpayers, right? So I live in Methuen. My business is here. I mean, my whole life. You can't do that. And I get, people might have the sense of feeling bad, but you can't. And it's not one student. And there are going to be people who get through. There just are.
Right.
No system, no check is 120%.
But at least you guys are making the effort to try and purge the rules of kids who don't belong in Methuen.
And we're finding them.
Yeah.
If you get there, if people watch the meetings, almost every month, we probably had, a dozen or so.
Right.
Those are people removed from the district.
And those were people who the previous superintendent was protecting. Because the previous superintendent didn't want anybody to leave because every kid, even if they came from Lawrence, boosted her numbers for grants and everything else, right? It goes by per pupil.
Yeah,
the money you get from the state. And I remember you, and I remember Jana, and I also remember somebody else, I just can't remember who it was at the time, bringing it up and say, yeah, but we're paying for it. Our tax money is going for people in other communities. And of course, Some people, the Tribune had to make it about race, right? Other people had to make it about race.
Right.
But I don't want anybody from North Andover going to the Lawrence schools. I don't want anybody from Lawrence going to the North Andover schools.
Unless it's like school choice, right?
Right.
Then,
yeah.
then you can do
And by the
that.
way, I'm a big fan of school choice.
If you have the means, Methuen does not have those means right now. We have to get, for our residents, we have to get everything, in check.
I just want people to do it right. If there's a way to do it, and you live in Lawrence, and they've got school choice, fine. I'm all for that. But if they don't, you gotta go to school in Lawrence. I'm sorry. Oh, you know what? I have an idea. Move out of Lawrence.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
We've got about 5 minutes left. Believe it or not, I can't believe we burned a whole show now. What do you want the parents out there to know going into the next school year that they can expect, and what you guys are going to be working on?
I have no idea. And I say that
I
completely
love that answer.
honest.
I love that answer. When was the last time we heard a politician say, I don't know? Right? Usually they just make up an answer,
Listen,
right? I love that
I'm a
answer.
parent first, right? And I would love to sit here and say, well, prepare for this and that. We really don't know. What we're hoping for is that we're going to be back, like I said, full days, 5 days a week, every student.
No masks.
I'm assuming, but again, I just don't know.
Right.
We've seen the new mandates come
Would you
down.
support no masks? If that came before you guys and they said, okay, we're going to take a vote.
If the
no
numbers were,
masks?
yeah, why not?
Okay.
If the numbers were showing that no masks were required and that the incidents were super low, yeah. I mean, but you're still seeing it, right? Like my kid plays baseball. There have been instances,
Really?
but we haven't seen transmission amongst the teams,
Right.
which is a good thing,
Right.
Because that's more important. That's what we were following this whole year. For every incident we had in school, it wasn't how many cases we had in school. It was from that one case, how many other students caught it in the classroom as well. And those numbers were super low, which was what allowed us to keep pushing forward and keep.
I think there's no doubt that the new mayor is doing a great job with the schools. I think there is still a doubt, though, about the superintendent. She came up under Judy. It was kind of controversial. She's come in. She's done a couple of things she's done some great things, but she's done a couple of things that don't seem so great. What is your experience with her?
I think we have to grade her on herself, right? I don't think it's fair to put her under the previous superintendent, who, by the way, a lot of people in Methuen still love. Right? Like
she's a wonderful person.
And I always say that. I
Right.
always say that. You have to distinguish the person from whatever they did. And
However, though, she talked about transparency in every sentence. Like, you could ask her what time it was, and she'd say, in all transparency. Like, she was transparent, and she was the least transparent superintendent we've had in the Merrimack Valley in 25 years.
I think people don't really know what transparency means.
Right.
I hear that word thrown around all the time, and then those same people are like the
least
secretive
transparent people in the world, right.
I think people kind of need a tutelage on what that word
Word
means.
definitions.
But I will say this, and I truly say this from my heart. Brandy Kwong has worked her tail off through this pandemic. There has not been one question I've asked her that has gone unanswered. She literally has been working tirelessly. I don't agree with 100% of things she does all the time, right? But I don't have to.
Right.
I know.
You don't agree with I don't agree with my mom all the time.
No, but I also know that, like I said in the beginning, I know that she's truly believes that what she's doing
is she doing things differently? I guess the reason why I brought up Judy Scanos because she was trained under Judy.
Yeah.
Is she doing things differently than what Judy was doing? Does she have a different philosophy on education, or is it kind of the same philosophy?
So I would say yes. I mean, short answer, I would say yes.
Yes,
she
it's
is
different?
she is doing things differently.
Okay. All right.
I would say that. Keeping in mind that she's only been in this position for about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And
I want to give her a chance. I don't know her, right? I knew Judy, so it was easier, but I want to give her a chance. I want to give her the benefit of the doubt. I think everybody deserves the benefit of the doubt. Of
course.
But I hear it from people in Methuen, and I think it often, gee, she came up under Judy. It's the same thing like the people in the city council saying, we don't want Captain so-and-so to be the next chief because he came in under Solomon.
But I
and he
had that
worked under
concern
Solomon.
as well, right?
Right.
And I think the whole committee at the time did, because remember, we looked for outside other superintendent candidates. And eventually, we had Dr. McGee, who served under her as assistant. He has since left, and now we have Ron Noble. But I know that clock's ticking.
I know we've got a minute left, and the last question I want to ask
Yeah.
you, it had to do with Ryan DeSoglio. He brought something up, and I came. When you had a guy at the high school that was politicking with Black Lives Matter, using emails and sending out to students without the parents, Ryan seemed like the only one brave enough at that table to say, "Yeah, this is kind of wrong. We should change the policy so they can't do that." Has anything come from that?
Yeah, well, I don't think he was the only one. That was a complete group effort. And yes, we did put policy in place. I don't think anybody at the time was like, oh, well, this is like no big deal.
Well, the mayor seemed to be perfectly okay with it. He was on the show. I'll pull the clip. He was on the show. He perfectly fine with it. Black Lives Matter. Let them do it. Let them send them to the kids. He seemed to be fine with it. I'm not fine with it. In any school system. I don't care where it is.
It has nothing to do with the Black Lives Matter. For me, it had to do with what you do for one, you have to do for all, right? So if it's something that people don't agree with, you still have to allow it if you're going to allow one.
I think what I objected to was no adult, much less an educator, should be emailing children without forwarding it to the parents so the parents know what it is that they're communicating
agreed.
to them.
And that's what they have to do now.
Right. Good. Oh, well, excellent. Anything you want to leave us with? 15 seconds. We're gonna go right to the post.
15 seconds. I don't even know if I could get something out in 15
Well,
seconds.
we can go a
but
little
thank
over
you.
if you've got something.
Yeah, we can go a little.
I love having you here.
At least somebody does.
I love having you here. I miss our Friday night jaunts. Hopefully that's going to start up again soon. We're actually going to be going to Tomo on Saturday if you'd like to join us. But I do miss it, and I also really appreciate that you and I don't agree on a lot of stuff, but we can still be friends.
Of course,
right? We can still agree to disagree, and if there's an issue between us, we talk to each other, right? And I appreciate that because that shows maturity and it shows bravery, especially in this political environment. Anything you want to leave us with?
Anything I want to leave you with, Tom?
Like if there's one thing you want the parents to know right now that they may not know, what would it be?
I want them to know that they can contact me.
Okay. And how can they do that?
I think that's important because we have our email, my phone number's listed everywhere.
Right.
The email's online, obviously, or contact, anybody you feel comfortable contacting. But I do want people to know that I am accessible.
I'll add the phone number when we go offline.
Yeah.
I'll add it to the feed.
Because at the end of the day, like I said, I do what I think is best as a parent, but it's not just me, right? I'm an elected official, so I'm elected to represent the thoughts of everybody. So
I find myself wanting to agree with you most of the time.
Yeah.
Because I love you to death. But sometimes I don't, and I wince and I go, does she really know what she's doing there? But I think that's. I would worry if you agreed with me 100% of the time. I would worry if Neil.
I would worry if I agreed with you 100% of the time.
I don't agree with my mom 100% of the time. So it's great when people don't agree when they can at least talk it out as grown-ups and adults, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of that, or at least a history of that in our city, right? You can disagree and not be disagreeable.
Right.
And again, maybe because of my profession, if I had to cut off everybody I disagreed with, I wouldn't have a profession. So, I think people need a little bit thicker skin, and I can take it. What I don't like is a general blanket email, alluding to things that I might have said at a meeting or whatever. Just call me.
Right.
And I've had a couple parents do that, and it's good because, like I said, I can have a personal chat with them and say, listen, I get your side, but here's mine.
Right.
And how can we kind of meet in the middle? And
I think one of the things that you should be teaching kids is to listen better. Grown-ups today, you're talking to them and they're thinking of the next thing to say. They're not even listening to you. And then later on, they'll say, well, you said this. Well, were you listening to me when I said that? You weren't listening. It seems as though communication is sorely lacking, especially among young people.
Everywhere.
My God.
Everywhere.
I had an intern that I said something to one day. She half heard what I said and flipped out thinking I said something different. I'm like, so you weren't even listening to what I said. And I feel so bad for some of these kids because their retention and their ability to pay attention, for the show, right, is sorely lacking, and they're not getting it in school.
yeah, and that's interesting because when you talk about remote learning, that sense of focus was definitely taxed, right? Yeah. So no one's going to like this answer, but it starts at home.
I agree.
mean, that's just how I feel.
I also think, though, that the schools have to stop pretending to be parents. Like, stop pretending to be their parents.
I don't think we can do that at all anymore.
No.
When I think of my teachers growing up, they hugged me and told me they loved me and, could say they were disappointed at you. And if you didn't hand in your homework, it was, go to the principal's office. Now it's really, and it's not, again, Methuen. It's everywhere, right? Those teachers have lost that ability.
But the most control of the schools of anybody has is at the local level. So I always look at the local level, having sat on a school committee, I always look at the local level school board members to try and push back on some of the things that they're asked or told to do by higher ups in education, whether it's the Department of Ed at the state level, federal level, whatever.
But when you were on the school committee, I guarantee the country wasn't the way it is right now.
That's true. Very true.
It's
very,
unique
very
right
true.
now.
I gotcha. All right, you can roll that up. I want to thank Jana, Zanni, Pesce. It's Jana!
Thank you.
We love Jana. Love to have you back. I'd love to have you back with Lou and Santos, too. I think that would probably be a fun conversation.
I think she'll love that.
Yeah? I love her
coax her
so much.
into
I'd
it.
love to have her on. I just didn't want it to be all like happy and rainbows and unicorns. And
Why
stuff,
not? That's great.
Because everybody will tune out. People tune into this show for controversy, right?
No.
All right.
I'll come on with her. That's enough controversy.
All right. I want to thank McLennan Real Estate Century 21, Tomo's on Salem, on Broadway in Salem, New Hampshire, Happy Crab on 28 in Salem, New Hampshire, Attorney Ted Fairburn, who works on workers' compensation, Angelo over there at A&M Auto Body will take care of your car if you've got any kind of a problem with your car. Borelli's Deli EIS Investigation, Marsan and Son Construction, AFC Urgent Care, and who did we miss? HS Investigations. Sounds like Melvin Taylor says we got to go home. But before you go home, thank you to Chrissy, my fine producer, Studio 21, and the United Podcast Network. Melvin Taylor says go home, so you got to go home already.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.